Hello and welcome back to the channel. On today's tutorial, I'm going to be sharing with you how to cut an asymmetric Victorian corset. And if this is something you like, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button. Let's dive right into today's video. So here, I've gone ahead to mark out all my basic measurements, which includes my shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust, shoulder to waistline. And to get from my waistline to my top length, I added about 5 inches. So for this pattern, we are making use of a bust dart. So my shoulder to bust is 9 inches, my shoulder to under bust is 12 inches, my shoulder to waist is 17 inches. So by the time we take out our bust dart, our back pattern will be shorter. So after that, I'll go ahead to mark my shoulder divided by 2. My shoulder is 14 inches divided by 2. I have 7 inches, and I'm going to go ahead to go down by 1 inch and mark my shoulder slope. From that point, the next step is to go ahead to find your chest line. And to find your chest line is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. So if you're on a plus size, you're going to do your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 2 inches. So after I'm done doing that, whatever measurement I have, I'm going to trace it out. This is just to draw out my chest line and make sure that I have a straight line at that point. So I'll just go ahead to place my ruler, and I'm going to rule a line at that point, and that will serve as my chest line. Next is to go ahead to place my ruler, and I'm going to connect from the shoulder slope down to that chest line this way. And after doing that, I'll go ahead to divide my chest line into 2. To divide that, place your tape and fold it this way, and go ahead to mark at that point. So from that point you marked, go out by ½ inch. Now you're going to place your tape and you're going to mark the bust circumference. My bust circumference is 33 divided by 4. I have 8.6. So now you're going to place your French curve touching your bust circumference down to that ½ inch at the armhole and down to your shoulder this way. So we are not going to make use of our armhole that much, but it's important to draw that out also. The next step you want to mark is your nipple to nipple divided by 2. My nipple to nipple is 7 inches divided by 2. I have 3.5. So what is your nipple to nipple? That is the distance between your two busts. Go ahead to measure it and divide it by 2. Now I'm going to go ahead to place my curved ruler, and I'm going to connect all the dots that I have made, marking a straight line down to my top length. So after I'm done marking this, I'm going to go ahead to mark out my basic measurements for the neckline, which is 3 by 3 inches, and I'll go ahead to place my curved rule, and I'm going to connect. So after I'm done connecting, the next step I'm going to take is to divide the remaining part of my shoulder into 2 places, and you're going to go ahead to fold and mark. So after you're done doing that, go ahead to connect it upwards. This is just going to serve as a guide. So now the next step I'm going to take is to mark my dart intake. So for a plus size, go ahead and use 1.5 inches. Now I'm making use of 1 inch, and I'm going to go ahead to mark that on both sides of my under bust and my waistline, and I'm going to go ahead to connect. After connecting, I'm going to place my French curve, and I'm going to connect this way. So also at the under bust of the other side, I'm going to place and connect. So now this is what I have at that point. So going down to the lower part of my pattern, I'm going to place my ruler this way and connect down to the top length. So after I'm done connecting, this is to go ahead to mark my dart intake at the upper part. But before I mark that, I'm just going to go ahead. So now I'll go up by 2 inches and mark a line at that point. After that, I'll be marking ½ inch dart intake on those 2 points. So why am I doing this? You don't want to have too much dart intake, so that when you're sewing your pattern, it won't be too curvy at the upper part. So after I'm done doing that, I'm just going to go ahead to place my curved ruler, and I'm going to connect all the way from there down to the 2 inches on top of my chest line. Next step is to impute your body measurement. I'm going to place my tape, and I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4. Then measure the ½ inch dart intake on both sides, which is 1, and add ½ inch for sewing this pattern. At the under bust, I'll mark the under bust circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace, and add ½ inch. So coming down to my waistline, I want to snatch out my waist. What I'm going to do is my actual waist measurement which is 28 inches. I'm going to do 28 minus 4. That is what I want to snatch out. I'll have 24 inches. So 24 inches divided by 4, I have 6. I'll mark that 6 inches, measure the dart intake, replace it, and add ½ inch. So for this pattern, you do not need much allowance. So now at the hip point or at the top length, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, and I will just add ½ inch for sewing allowance because there's no dart intake at that point. Now after doing that, I'm just going to place my curved ruler and I'm going to connect. So at this point, if you find my tutorial very interesting and educative, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. After this, the next step I'm going to take is to go ahead to mark my bust dart. So the bust dart differs for different people. So how are you going to mark this bust dart? You're going to come down from your bust area. So my bust dart is 1.5 inches. I'm going to place and mark and then connect it to where I marked out my curve at that is my nipple to nipple point, and I'll place my ruler to connect. After drawing it out, I'm just going to shade it to indicate that it is my bust area or the bust dart that I have at that point. So remember that if you take out your bust dart at your front, this is to make sure that the lower part of your pattern matches at the both sides. So next, you want to go ahead to draw out the neckline. I'll place my French curve this way, so you can go ahead to draw this out, but you find out that your armhole is a little open, so I'll just go up by ½ inch and I'll just trace it out at this point. After I'm done tracing it out, I'm just going to go ahead to introduce my French curve or curved rule, and I will rule it out properly. After I'm done ruling it out properly, I'm just going to go ahead to use my marker to mark this out. But after this, you're going to blend in to make sure that your lines meet. So if you place it this way, you notice that it is not meeting, so I'll place it back and I'll trace it down. So after tracing it down, I'm just going to go ahead to use my marker to mark this out. So as you can see at this point, it is matching. So now this is what I am going to go ahead to cut out. But before this, I'm going to divide this part into 2, or you can add a dart, but since we have already snatched our waistline, we are going to add a style line to that point. So we are going to go ahead to cut that part into 2. That is after we must have ruled out the line. So now on my front pattern, I will go up by 1 inch and I'll place my curved rule, and I'm going to go ahead to connect it down to the lower part. So this is what I have for my front pattern. I'm done drafting, and the next step is just to go ahead to label my pattern so that I don't misplace each part, especially. So while cutting out, I'm going to cut out my bust dart, and I'm going to go ahead to blend it up with a sellotape this way. You can just go ahead to pin yours if you don't have a sellotape to do that. And now we are going to also cut out my dart, but make sure that you blend back your side pattern. So after I'm done cutting out, this is what I have, and next we'll be moving over to the back of this pattern. So for the back pattern, I've gone ahead to mark out my basic measurement just like we did for the front. So what I'm going to go ahead to do right now is to go ahead to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2. But for my back pattern, you notice that it is a little different from the front. My shoulder to waistline is 15.5 inches. So why is this way? We took out a bust dart of 1.5 inches from the front, and my top length is now 20.5 for the back because of we took out 1.5 inches also from that part. So I'll go ahead to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, which is 3.5 inches. So sorry for the noise at the background, it is actually raining here. So I'll go ahead to connect my pattern from the chest to the bust to the under bust to the waist and to the top length. So for this pattern, I'm not actually supposed to use an under bust for the back pattern, but I did that just to make sure you understand what I'm doing. So next, I'm going to go ahead to mark my dart. So for the dart for the back, I'm going to mark 1/2 inch at both sides, and I'm going to go ahead to connect it upwards and also connect it down to the lower parts. So after connecting my dart, the next step is to go ahead to insert my measurement. At the bust, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4. So my bust is 33 divided by 4. I'll mark and add 1/2 inch for this pattern. Make sure you take it to the chest line. At the under bust, I'll go ahead and insert my under bust measurement divided by 4. Measure the dart intake, replace and add my sewing allowance. Now at the waistline, remember we snatched our waist. The front waistline is what we are going to use. Go ahead to mark, measure your dart intake, replace it and add 1/2 inch for your sewing allowance. So I'll go ahead and mark my hip circumference at my top length and add 1/2 inch to it. And I'll just go ahead to use my ruler to connect all my patterns. So just in case you do not understand, I'm just going to place my tape to show you back all my measurements. So placing my tape on my pattern, this is my shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust. So on my waistline for the front, I have 17 inches, but because we took out 1.5 for the bust dart, my back measurement is 15.5 inches and my back length is 20.5, but my front length is 22 inches. So because of the bust dart, I have a reduction of 1.5 inches for the back pattern. So I'll go ahead and mark 1.5 inches also, and I'll come up by 1/2 inch here. So remember we went up by 1/2 inch at the armhole at the front pattern. So from here I'll come down by 1/2 inch and I'll go ahead to connect it. This is to make sure that my back pattern, when I'm lacing it at the back, is not going to pop up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll use my marker to mark this all out. So for my front pattern at the waistline, at the lower part, I marked 1 inch. So I'm going to go ahead to just mark that 1 inch all the way to the back pattern, and I'm going to connect this way. So after I'm done connecting, so I'm going to go ahead to use my marker to label this out. After I'm done labeling out, so that initial 1.5 inches I marked, I'll go ahead to remark it and I'll place my ruler and I'll connect and draw a straight line. This is to mark out the lacing bar area of this pattern, and after I'm done doing that, I'm just going to make a dot at that point to indicate that it is my lacing bar area. So after this we are done, and I'll just go ahead to add another style line to this, because in a Victorian corset you have multiple style line or dart intake, and I'll just rule a line, and after that I'm just going to go ahead to label out my pattern. So if you find this tutorial very interesting and educative, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up and join us in our next video. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for always supporting my channel. So with this, we have come to the end of today's tutorial.